This video won't dwell on whether the new US administration will actually force Denmark to give control of Greenland to the US, nor how Greenland might be taken if it ever does change hands. This video will simply explain what Greenland under US rule might give to the US, primarily in the military sense. Video will cover potential new facilities, reach of airbases, and potential future strategic uses. How might Russian, Chinese, and European interests be threatened if Greenland is ever exploited further militarily? People often ask me how to make videos and how to express and communicate their ideas. Well, if you're an absolute beginner in video production, InVideo AI can help, which is sponsoring this video. InVideo lets you express your ideas in the form of stunning videos in the most seamless and intuitive way possible, even if you are an absolute beginner. Other video making tools usually have steep learning curves, and they don't cover all the steps you need to complete the process. InVideo can be your creative partner that does everything for you. Just focus on your vision and idea and type in a prompt. You can also edit anything you like add music or voiceover. InVideo allows you to bring your ideas to life, whether it's telling a story, creating a YouTube explainer, music video footage, animated fiction, or even making product videos. It will put you in the director's seat while it does all the heavy lifting. You can try InVideo AI for free. This will save you hundreds of dollars that you would otherwise spend on editing, animating, and other production costs. Click the link in the video description below and give InVideo a try. US President Trump recently said, quote, "The US needs Greenland because it is so strategically located," end quote. So let's fast forward into a near future where the US does control said strategic location. Why is it even strategic? Greenland is a huge chunk of landmass. It's the world's biggest island, with Australia being a continent. Yet some 80% of Greenland is covered in thick ice all year long. A digression, did you know that if all ice would melt on Greenland, a massive lake would form in the middle of it? Despite the harsh environment, people have lived there for thousands of years. Greenland was used militarily during World War II. After Denmark fell to Germany, Greenland, which was a Danish colony, lost its overseer and acted independently. So the US swooped in and built many outposts all around, ports to refuel ships, airfields to refuel planes, various radio and weather stations, and so on. A digression, during the war, Germans established a few weather stations on Greenland. At one point, Germans burned down a Danish patrol outpost after the patrol discovered them. Later on, US bombers destroyed the German weather station. Anyway, by the time the Cold War started, most of the Allied outposts fell out of use. The US relied on more or less just one large base, the Thule Airbase up north, today's Bidufik base. It's interesting that despite the fact a war would have seen more action near Greenland, the US remained at that one base throughout the Cold War. Its crucial feature was operation of an early warning radar to track possible Soviet ICBMs. Then again, stopover to refuel bombers and weather stations were not as crucial anymore due to advances in technology. There were other more experimental bases too, like the Camp Century base built into the ice. That was to research the possibility of making a network of mobile nuclear missile launchers operating under the ice sheet on Greenland. But after some years the idea was dropped as the ice sheet construction proved to be too dangerous. Back in the Cold War, the balance of power and doctrine was different. NATO feared that it would be on the defensive in Europe against the Warsaw Pact. So most of US air power was planned to be used over Europe. And doctrinally it was thought that the war wouldn't have lasted long, that it would likely escalate to nuclear use fairly quickly. Delivery of nuclear warheads requires far fewer planes. Earlier in the Cold War, bombers were to be just refueled on Greenland, if not in air, so one base sufficed. And later on, with silver bullet weapons, meaning expensive, very long-ranged cruise missiles, even deep penetration into the Soviet Union was not necessary. Today, the situation is different. There is another Cold War, but Russia is a secondary worry for the US, far behind China. Having greater access to Greenland doesn't mean that much to the US when it comes to fighting China conventionally. the US has far better places to fight China from. Of course, as this new Cold War progresses, it's quite plausible cooperation between China and Russia might become such that, for example, Chinese submarines might regularly operate in the Arctic Ocean. And to help hunt submarines, air power is often used. Anti-submarine planes like P-8 Poseidon are used in such instances. But now we're talking about around-the-clock air operations day in, day out, covering a large ocean. It's plausible a single base on Greenland would not suffice. And in an alliance, it's not implausible that Chinese air forces would also be stationed in Russia to help protect their submarines, for example. Chinese force projection towards US bases on Greenland would also be possible. And before you know it, a whole layer of defensive and offensive assets might be needed for the US on Greenland to make the whole system work. Suddenly, from a single US base, there might come a need for several or even a dozen US bases. But Chinese submarines might be a secondary concern. China's big ICBM fields are located in such positions within China that it's very likely a nuclear exchange between China and US would have China fire ICBMs towards the eastern US coast, using routes that would go straight over Greenland. We are talking here about approximately 2/3 of the entire Chinese ICBM arsenal being located in such a way that if Washington, New York, and rest of US East Coast is to be targeted, those missiles will go over or near Greenland. That's in contrast with Soviet and Russian routes, which would be much more varied, as Russian launch locations are much more spread out and closer to the US. There's a single early warning ballistic missile radar in Greenland now. Its location stemming from the Cold War era, but it's likely the US might want more for redundancy and protection against Chinese attacks on radars. Also, any future ballistic interceptors might be well served by being stationed on Greenland, if there's any realistic chance of them catching Chinese missiles in time. ICBM interception is all about being forward enough. Boost phase interception would be best, but that's impossible with ICBM launchers done from deep inside China. So mid-course stage interception is second best, and Greenland interceptors might allow for interceptions at roughly the half point of Chinese missiles' trajectory, which might be enough to intercept them before the current generation of Chinese missiles reach their apogee and deploy their multiple warheads. Intercepting individual warheads after set point would be much harder. In a way, if you're gonna remember just one thing from this entire video, it's the threat of China's ICBMs and US defenses against those. That's why Greenland matters most. But that's just with regards to China. Russia, despite being a lesser threat to the US, would still be an additional adversary on top of China. However unlikely it may seem now, it's possible that the future might see Russia and US in a limited shooting war over Ukraine, for example. Perhaps just so limited that it doesn't involve nukes, but that it still includes US strikes on Russian infrastructure inside Russia. And Russia is huge. Going through Europe will not really reach many targets within Russia, at least not without having to go over lots of thickly defended airspace. But using routes over the Arctic Ocean via Greenland, many additional important targets could be threatened as well, like targets in central Russia, and even targets around Moscow by using additional different approach vectors, like from the east. Even stealthy cruise missiles might have their survival rates greatly compromised if they need to first cross 2,000 miles of Russian territory, like if going via Europe. Majority of Russian oil fields are located south or southeast of the Yamal Peninsula. Majority of oil refineries are located east or southeast of Moscow. A good deal of all those could be additionally threatened via Greenland. Here's just one operational example to one possible target: Omsk oil refinery. Two rough routes for missiles are shown from, let's say, optimistically close launch points using aircraft. Of course, missiles wouldn't fly straight, but that's beside the point. Firstly, 800 kilometers of reach difference is not irrelevant, but much more importantly, Western Russia is much more protected and covered with air defense systems. The map tries to show that, but keep in mind this is just a rough approximation of threat levels. But the point is that a lot of missiles, if launched via Greenland route, might encounter many times fewer defenses. Such a situation might be applicable to many targets inside central Russia, and it's not like the US could not use bases on Iceland or in Scotland or Norway to go north of the Scandinavian peninsula and do similar attacks. It could, and if there's war, it might. But Greenland might offer additional complications for Russia, adding new additional variables. Of course, it's not just oil and gas facilities that might be valid targets. Here's a map that shows some of the biggest arms production plants in Russia. A great deal of those is again located behind that initial wall of air defenses when looked from Western Europe, like factories in Yelabuga for Shahed-like drones, tanks in Nizhny Tagil, artillery in Yekaterinburg, specialized vehicles like launcher vehicles in Volgograd, ballistic missiles in Votkinsk, SAM missiles in Kirov, combat planes in Irkutsk and Komsomolsk-on-Amur, and so on. Anyway, more bases on Greenland would mean a lot more work, as harsh polar conditions are not something to be scoffed at. That being said, F-35s are regularly operating in such conditions, both in Alaska and sometimes on rotation at that one Greenland base, so temperatures of -40 or more Fahrenheit are not gonna prevent modern combat jets from working. Cold weather can actually bring some benefits due to denser air, like shortening runway distance and increasing lift and acceleration to a small degree. But overall, of course, polar conditions do require more effort. Constant de-icing both on planes and runways, special engine starting procedures to gradually heat up fuel, oil and lubricants and so on. It's a hassle. Having humans out in such low temperatures is not easy, especially if many bases with a lot of personnel are gonna be involved. But there are places on Greenland which are better suited for bases temperature-wise. Bidefik base is actually not in a hospitable part of Greenland, temperature-wise, showing that location rather than working conditions was key when operational limitations and requirements were considered. That being said, there are other places as well. They would all have to be near the coast for logistical purposes, so bases could easily be resupplied by ships. The middle of Greenland is covered in ice, so that's not really an option anyway. But the eastern coast has a somewhat milder climate, and its northern parts are still located close enough to Russia to matter to the US. The bases around said location could see bearable temperatures of 5 degrees Fahrenheit or -15 Celsius for 7 months of the year, with the June to August period actually seeing temperatures above freezing point. That's basically summer holidays in Greenland terms. Or further up north at the northeastern edge of Greenland. Conditions wouldn't be much different from those at Bidefik base, yet said bases would be as close to Russia and Chinese ICBM route as possible. Of course, proximity can cut both ways. Such forward positioning means you are farther away from help coming from the mainland US, which may have been why such locations weren't pursued in the first Cold War. But now, with Russia being weaker, it's possible even such forward locations might be looked into. Of course, building more bases and facilities close to Bidefik base is also a good option. Now, military presence would have to increase not just to threaten Russian infrastructure but also the economy. As the Arctic Ocean is more and more passable during the year, with the ice caps melting, Russia and even China are counting more and more on using said Arctic route to ship various goods, as it offers a shorter and cheaper route than going south around India. EU's position in a new Cold War or a shooting war is unknown and dependent on many variables, but US forward bases on Greenland, overseeing China's Arctic trade routes to the EU, might be additional leverage for the US. Even today, some Russian undocumented ships are using the Arctic route to ship oil westward. And bigger military presence might also come in handy to help defend various future mining operations. Greenland has so far been mostly untapped, even though it likely hides abundant deposits of various ores, including graphite, titanium, zinc, tungsten, uranium, and various rare earths. Bigger and domestic rare earths access might be precisely what the US needs in a prolonged Cold War with China, as such ores are important in electronics. China has banned export of some ores to the US, and having Greenland might give an extra layer of safety for the future for the US. No one really knows how much ore of which kind might be on Greenland, so protecting access to all that potential for years and centuries to come would be important. As Greenland has largely been autonomous under Danish rule, exploitation of ores has been curtailed due to natives not really allowing it in significant quantities. If Greenland remained autonomous, any new US military base would need Greenland's approval as well. But US owning Greenland might go around that problem and allow greater US exploitation of the island. But we are really outside the military scope of this video now. Greenland is a big place, it's well positioned, and its importance is only gonna grow. It would be easy to exploit it more militarily. And as we showed, reasons for military presence are varied and plentiful. Most of all, they might be about partial protection attempts from Chinese nuclear weapons. And remember, Binkov may talk about war, but only real peace can bring us all together.